It's busy up here and noisy. Thanks for coming along. As Jessica said, thanks Jessica, I'm Redmond O'Leary and I work for InterSystems. And we are a software company that powers and is the engine behind some of the world's most important applications. And fundamentally what we focus on, and you're very welcome to come down to our stand later on, we focus on complex problems around data. We solve problems around data that others struggle with. But today, I'm really excited and delighted to welcome Dr. Mark Harmon with us. Now, Mark is a very unique person to have on the stage with us because not only is he a medical doctor who has worked for the likes of Nike and Man City and specializes in emergency medicine, but he's also an entrepreneur. And he leads the strategy and the business development of his company, eConsult. Now, I find that a rare type of person, one who straddles kind of two aspects of our world. And when you look at our healthcare system, and we're coming into the winter now, we can feel the weather getting much colder the last few days. Think of situations and scenarios each of you have faced as you look to approach, healthcare problems that you can face. And all too often now we are seeing, and it seems like that trying to get a CGP is taking longer. You go to the emergency ward and we're all facing longer and longer waiting lists. And, as a whole, when we see messages that are coming out in the media, things just seem to be getting worse. The message we saying, think queues are getting longer, the waiting times are longer. It's taking longer to get surgery done. And we therefore continuously as a society, we seem to tolerate this. We seem to put up with this. And, if you look at Mark here, I was referring to him being quite unique as a person because of that business and the health aspect. So in the healthcare, we've got this situation, but in business generally doesn't tolerate mistakes or failure for very long. Now, there's something odd about that. There's something wrong about that in regards to looking to address, which is probably the most important problem in the world, which is our health. So I only read this morning, Sarah O'Connor in the FT Health section was talking about living to the age of 100 years. It's worth a look if you have a look at it later on. And do we really want to live to 100 years of age? Especially with that, the demographics are changing for each of us. So I brought Mark here along because he straddles those two sides and really to look at, well, what are the core problems of our healthcare, not just in the UK or in Ireland, but around the world. I wanted to have a chat. So, Mark, we face a significant mountain ahead of us. We face challenges face of us. Let's start looking to the future. What do you see our future healthcare looks like, let's say, in 20 years' time?
Thank you, Redmond. Morning, everybody. Anyway, so I think we are living in unprecedented times at the moment, and I think we'd all agree that the health system we've currently got is probably unfit for the 21st century. And I don't know whether any of you know Eric Topol. He's a very prominent cardiologist in the US, advised the NHS a number of times, also an innovator. But he wrote a fantastic book a few years ago around the creative destruction of medicine. It's quite a dramatic title, but actually it's something I think needs to happen. But he talks about this super convergence of things that are happening at the moment, which is quite unique. So things like computing power, so the massive computing power that we've now got sitting in our pockets. Things like biometrics, things like life sciences, things like research, things like data, which we all talked about today. Things like diagnostics at home, this sort of stuff. It's all coming together, so that over the next sort of 10 years, all this innovation and technology is going to converge and is going to completely rewrite the way we deliver medicine going forward, which I personally think is a great thing. It's quite scary, but it's also lots and lots of opportunity. But I think, we're going to drag our health system kicking and screaming into the 21st century. We're going to move from what is historically been an industrialized sort of Victorian setup into something customized for individuals. doctors are making decisions on data that's based on population health, not on individuals. So it's no surprise that decisions aren't necessarily of the top quality. But more important than that is actually, once we get to a customized medicine, we can then start looking at some really interesting things like looking at prevention and looking at propensity to disease.
So who's wearing a wearable today? Put your arm up if you're wearing a wearable. Anyone wearing a wearable on any wristwatch? Yeah, there's quite a few of us. Are you suggesting, therefore, that we're going to get into personalized drugs using our future wearables, and maybe not just drugs that are assessing our heartbeat, perhaps ones that are assessing our long-term heart rates, but that these drugs would be produced to meet our personal needs, not just the global needs? Because each of us are used to going into a pharmacy, you've got a headache and you get some paracetamol, a generic option. Are you suggesting that we'll have something personal based upon wearables that we wear?
Possibly, yeah. I mean, we already know, precision medicine's a big thing now, and particularly with cancer, where we no longer, well, unfortunately, we do still poison the body with chemotherapy, but that's changing, and that'll revolutionise in the next few years in terms of targeting specific cells that are diseased rather than the healthy cells. But not only that, we can actually start developing drugs for particular individuals, and from genetic profiling, we can understand whether a drug will be particularly effective within a particular individual. And then we can start linking that with biometric data, with diagnostics, and then we'll start to get a customized healthcare system that's tailored for the individual and not for everybody. And fashion and footwear have been doing this for years, and I'm happy to say healthcare is soon catching up.
So this sounds almost like, if any remember, Minority Report style forecasting, seeing things before they've even happened. But when we look at, what it sounds like to me, we need to look at the medical decision making. And there's an irony here that it seems like we need to turn medical decision making into a science. There's a contradiction there, isn't there? Because when we look at our current health system, it is knowledge-based. It's slow, it's expensive, it's fragmented, and it's a victim of its own size. It's like this gargantuan Frankenstein thing that we need to tackle. So let me take you back. Let's go backwards. It would seem to me, and those that I speak to in healthcare systems, not just in the UK but around the world, that the technology and the systems we've built around healthcare have evolved in multiple different directions. And some of them are evolving much quicker than others. But you touched on it there. It seems we've got very antiquated ways still in the way that we tackle diagnosis and treatment. You mentioned industrialized earlier on, Mark. Are our ways of working still very much like Victorian times?
I think so. I mean, just look at the infrastructure we've got and the fact that it's crumbling. It doesn't really speak to each other, to different areas. But we have come a long way since Victorian times, of course. But I think we've still got a long way to go. And as clinicians, we're always trying to do best for our patients, but we are humans, and mistakes do happen. And let me share a quite an alarming statistic with you. In 2022, the GMC, the General Medical Council, did a review recently on iatrogenic harm, which basically is harm caused by the medical profession to patients. We're all trying not to cause harm, but unfortunately it does happen. And last year, there was 5% of patient interactions with medicine resulted in patient harm. That doesn't sound much when you think of the volume of interactions, but actually there's over 450 million appointments every year within the health service. So 5% of that is actually 22.5 million interactions with patients. So 22.5 million interactions with patients and the healthcare system resulted in harm to the patient. Now, most of that is through poor medication prescribing and poor decision making. But in 2022, that shouldn't happen.
That's an awful view of the decision-making process, isn't it? Really, when you look at those stark contrasts, 5% suddenly it's real lives. So the current healthcare system has this industrialized approach, and what we touched on earlier on, is it a case now that one size doesn't fit all, not just in the drugs, but in the system itself, that we need to move away from the one size fits all?
Certainly, I think, and there's many reasons why we are where we are. There's unprecedented pressure on the system. A&E, where I work, 16% increase in attendances over the last few years, 53% reduction in hospital beds, so you can't get patients out of the department. Admitted, causes of flow, so 4-hour target is now 62%. 400,000 patients last year waited over 12 hours on a trolley. So there's lots of reasons for this, but also I think the culture of the profession that we're in needs to change, because we're working under a lot of pressure. We're under a culture of litigation and blame. If you make a mistake, you're on your own. And that sort of culture of see one, do one, teach one has to change. It's archaic, it doesn't work, it's not safe. Technology exists now to make it better.
So not only is it impacting us as patients, but also it's having a dramatic effect upon the clinicians, fellow GPs like yourself.
Absolutely. I mean, just last year, 27,000 nurses left the profession because of the pressure that they were under.
Well, that confirms a lot of what I'm reading in our newspapers. But let's maybe come out of this dark and dreary place and let's try and envisage, well, what could it look like? Let's look to the near future. Let's look at, maybe not today or tomorrow, but you've told me it doesn't have to be this way.
Sure, we can climb the mountain, so, and I think it takes a number of things. The first thing, we need to put the patient at the center. So it's education of the patient, empowerment of the patient, because the patient should be making the decision with the clinician. In fact, the patient should know more than a clinician. So we need to transfer the knowledge of power from the clinician to the patient. So there's education, there's integration. So we need to integrate systems together and ultimately pool and share resources, technology. So platforms like InterSystems is starting to do that and enable us to share data, to enable us to inform and make better decision making. So it's education, it's integration, and also it's navigation. So it's navigating pathways and helping map patient pathways across systems. Because at the moment, too many decisions are made in isolation. We've been operating in a valley floor for too long, where clinicians are in the mist, in the fog, unable to see the light, unable to communicate to their fellow clinicians. Patients can't get the information they need, and decision making ultimately has suffered.
So we're moving beyond the what if. We're looking at the possibilities behind decision-making process, and that's where I suppose both our companies have come together, where InterSystems have come together with eConsult.
Exactly, and I think the eConsult collaboration with InterSystems is a great example of how technology can change things. So InterSystems is a fantastic integrator. eConsult is a fantastic digital triage platform. So if you can take a triage from a patient up front, and through that triage and the algorithms work out how sick that patient is, what their presenting complaint is, where they need to go, who's best to treat them, and when and where, we can then route patients from home to the right clinician first time, every time, through systems like InterSystems. But that then enables us to do some really exciting things, because we can then not only get patients to the right place, so free up clinical resources, better for patient outcomes, faster treatment, diagnostics. We can also then, through the data, work out what investigations are needed, so we can pre-order investigations before patients arrive at the front door. We can look at prognosis of diagnosis, so we look at their probabilistic diagnostic with particular symptoms. So that shortness of breath is actually heart failure rather than pneumonia, for instance. And we can ultimately refer immediately to specialists. So we can completely transform the way that the healthcare system works currently. But more than that, we can actually start preventing and looking at prevention.
So we're moving from treatment to prevention, yeah? And we've talked about industrialized healthcare systems. There's like a manufacturing paradigm that I'm hearing. Is like, it's like right now we've got the factories of healthcare out there. And if you go down to the stand and you're curious about some more details, we'll be able to show you what we've done with eConsult and that e-triaging, so you can get some demos down there. But that's what we've worked together. Up until recently, I suppose the conclusion there is that we've been a knowledge-based profession, yeah? And what we're trying to do is to complement this, that we're trying to move from being what I've written down here, a curiosity business, that it's no longer knowing what are the right questions to ask, but so not only is it the right answers to the questions, but the right questions to ask is actually what I want to say.
That's right, absolutely.
Yeah?
I think these factories of healthcare need to be transformed into sort of service-oriented centres of excellence where it's all about ideas. So decisions feed into and from ideas, and the curiosity then starts to understand what questions need to be asked in the first place.
Okay. And we've had some real examples, we've had real patients, we've had some real benefits.
Exactly.
Because what we've tried to concentrate, what you might have noticed today, and you might have not have been expecting it, we haven't even mentioned the word data, I think. And yet we provide a data platform. We've deliberately, what we're trying to focus in on here is you and me and us and the patient aspect of that. Tell us an example of one of the patients.
Yeah, so I could just share a story to bring this to life, and it's cancer related. So cancer is one of the big four issues at the moment in the NHS, as we all know. If you pick up cancer early, not only do you improve patient outcomes, but you also improve costs, reduce costs of treatment by up to £13,000 per patient. The UK has the worst performance in cancer prognosis in the G7, so something needs to change. And it takes on average 5 visits to a GP before you get referred onto a cancer pathway. So I'll tell you a story about Judy here. So Judy's a 59-year-old lady who came in to see a GP last year with postmenopausal bleeding. GP sent her away with antibiotics for a urinary tract infection. Things didn't improve. In the end, she went back to the GP 5 times. Still, things weren't improving. So she then went online and did an e-consult, which is a structured triage with built-in flags. Now, that e-consult picked up the fact that these subtle symptoms and signs that Judy had might be cancer-related. So they flagged that to the GP. GP went in, referred Judy on a 2-week wait pathway, and she did unfortunately have endometrial cancer. But the good news was she was picked up early, and she's now in remission.
So you're saying that Judy owed her life to the solving of a complex data problem that happened to involve some machine learning and a complex decision-making process, basically.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And that's the now. But in the very near future, we can actually pick up those signs and symptoms. We can then surface questions at the same time to Judy from an oncologist specialist, and then we can trigger that referral mechanism straight into 2-week wait pathway. So in the next few months, we'll be able to refer immediately from home into a 2-week wait pathway, saving at least 4 weeks in the pathway. Each week you save increases the prognosis, the chance of survival by 1%. But in the far future, using data and analytics and propensity to disease and genomic profiles and this sort of stuff, we can actually prevent those symptoms from happening in the first place.
That's excellent, Mark. I hope that's been of interest to you. We deliberately didn't want to go down that technical route, but it lays beneath that, and that's what we're about. InterSystems is the foundation behind that, but it is genuinely about the differences we make to lives. Working with partners such as eConsult, please do come to enter a stand and we can further discussion that might be relevant to you. And we continue to look for those of you out there in the health system to complement us and become part of our ecosystem so we can make that change. But maybe, Jessica, we can take some questions from the audience, yeah? Thank you, Mark.
Thank
you. Got
you.
one over there.
Perfect. All right, I'm going to kick off if
Please,
it's okay.
Please do.
Sorry, everybody. Just with one question. Am I okay? Sorry, I'm not doing my job as host very well. So, you talked a lot about silos, and I don't like to throw jargon out there, but there's one word that I didn't hear you talk about when we were talking about information and data, which I think is a really hot topic at the moment, which is interoperability.
Yeah.
And you also talked about how technology is evolving, but technology seems to be evolving in the silos that are created within our healthcare system. And depending on who you talk to, healthcare also means different things to different people. If you talk to people from pharma and biotech, that's healthcare. That's healthcare. And if we talk about the NHS, that's also healthcare. But often seen as different things. Now, I'm really interested to understand your point of view on what needs to happen to really join up healthcare in its entirety to benefit from all the richness of data that we're seeing, so that ultimately, obviously, patients first and foremost benefit, clinicians in their practice, but right across that ecosystem, everyone is benefiting from the value of data. Much like we talked about with humanity earlier, there's so much of it. There has to be a way, surely, of really realizing that value.
Shall I kick off, Mark?
Okay.
So, you got me talking about data, but fundamentally, our organization's been going for over 40 years, and we started out at the Massachusetts Hospital going back, and the desire has always been for us to help connect things up. And funny enough, I think it was the joint conference previously that we met with Mark and eConsult, and one of their challenges was that interoperability. How do we connect into the NHS systems? How do we expand globally? How do we work with these protocols? We've already developed them, and we wrapped them up into a very affordable package to facilitate that technical interoperability, whether that is the likes of HL7 V2, Fire, you name it. That's our purpose. Take other examples. Epic, one of the world's largest software providers, they built their software on our platform since the time they were founded in 1979. But what we've sought to do 5 years ago is we went into a cloud-first model. And the goal there was to make it very reachable, especially to the startup community and the health world, that it doesn't matter whether you go up to AWS or Azure or Alibaba, we're up there, you can use the software, we charge by the minute or we charge, so we're very flexible in that. We're just trying to be the enablers of that. So from a technical capability, our goal is to address those complex data problems and to allow that interconnectivity of data. But obviously behind that, what also has to be solved is the business process side. Yeah, that aspect. Mark?
I think, there's so many challenges. We don't have time to go into it, but and interoperability is absolutely key. I think I'd just say there's two sides to every story. I think data is obviously massively important going forward, but we also need to be careful of a data deluge. So data is only useful when it's relevant. And I think from a clinical perspective, it's amazing to see all the data we've got. I mean, other than the ethical and governance issues, but what's going to help me make a better decision for my patient? Because the worry is I'm going to get overwhelmed with data, and it's going to be difficult to then sift through the relevant pieces. So there's just a caveat in terms of, absolutely data is the future, but it's picking the data that's relevant and that's going to make a better life for everybody. That's going to be the challenge.
Absolutely. It sounds like right data at the right time in the right place is going to be really important there. Fantastic. All right. Questions from the audience. I'm going to come right over here. Please name and where you're from.
I'm Manuel Copas, and I'm basically a lecturer in genomics at the University of Westminster, and I'm also chief scientist of a startup company called Cambridge Precision Medicine. And I just wanted to sort of express my sort of experience trying to work with the NHS, which, to be completely honest, being involved in the sort of startup ecosystem, a lot of the time, and this is not a criticism, but a lot of the time we were, okay, no, let's not work with the NHS because, it's the regulatory process that you have to go through. Sometimes at least for me, as a small company, is kind of...
Could you make the microphone a bit closer?
It's a little bit daunting. So my question to you would be, and this is more like, what would be the right approach for small startups to sort of engage a little bit more and have opportunity to sort of work with the NHS in a manner that's sort of where innovation is not stifled. I'm not saying that innovation isn't stifled, but I think perhaps there could be some sort of barriers that we could work towards that to break them.
Do you want to start with that? So Manuel, and it's about the barriers to work with the NHS.
Okay, sorry, it's very hard to hear. So
yeah,
your question was about what advice do you have for startups trying to get into the NHS?
Yeah, overcome the barriers.
Yeah. we can maybe chat offline because there's a long answer and a short answer. The short answer is don't go somewhere else. The long answer is actually it takes a lot of hard work, effort, resilience, but it's worth it. But I think the first question is, what's the problem that you're trying to solve?
Yeah.
Because if you've got a really good solution to a really pertinent problem, then that's a really good place to begin with. And then how you then address accessing the NHS is a very complicated beast. But we can talk afterwards if you'd like to. Yeah.
And to add to that, Manuel, if you or anyone else has a technical issue and wants some help solving it, we will help. Yeah. So come to me on the stand or go to any of my colleagues in the stand, and we'll help sort you from, let's say, the software side to get you going.